you'll bring your tools. We'll be outside working. Should be hopefully a very nice day for that. And Todd, is there anything else you want to let them know about that? We need it so bad. We'll be happy to get it. I think I felt a few drops coming in, so hopefully there's some more. Are there any other announcements we need to make tonight? Jacob, yeah. Kids Corner's May the 3rd, so I think that'll be a week from Sunday. May the 3rd will be the next Kids Corner. May the 3rd will also be the next Family Fellowship Luncheon. And so is there any other? So Bible School is June 8th through the 11th. Go ahead and be putting that on your calendar. We hope a lot of people will be available to help with that. That'll be a Monday through a Thursday night. Stephen Harrell is planning to be here to be the speaker for the children. And I know that we would always, many hands make light work. And it's always good to have a lot of adults around to keep an eye on things when there are kids around. So please put that on your calendar, June the 8th through the 11th. Anything else before Mr. Steve comes to speak? So seeing none, we'll turn things over to Brother Steve.
Good evening. Good to see all of you out tonight. Also special treat to see Miss Ellen out tonight. So glad to have her here. We're continuing in the book of Exodus. So you can turn to Exodus 22. And Ray asked me what the topic for tonight was. It's Exodus 22 and 23, various judgments. So a few weeks ago, when we got into this concept of judgments, it's a layer of the law. So we have the Ten Commandments, and under that we have the judgments. And we've said many times that they are basically kind of like our case law. They give interpretation and detailed understanding to the things that are written in those Ten Commandments. And there are a few sections within these two chapters, in chapter 21, where there is a more extensive instruction on a certain area of law. And so we have gone into a couple of those. One dealt with the issue of slavery and servanthood. And so we looked at that as a unit. And then the next dealt with care for the vulnerable within the society. And so we looked at that as a unit. And we had one message where we started down this track of looking at these seemingly disconnected regulations. And if you've read Proverbs, you know what I mean. You'll have a thought, and then a second thought, and a third thought, and a fourth thought, and they frequently don't seem connected at all. And so these judgments are a little bit like that. And so tonight we're going to deal. I think normally I have 3 or 4 points. I think I've got like 9 points tonight. Just simply trying to categorize or entitle each of these different areas of judgments. So we're going to start by reading from chapter 22, verse 16, to chapter 23, verse 9. And we're going to skip verses 21 through 27 in chapter 22 because we covered that in a previous message. So I'm going to jump down when I get there from verse 20 to verse 28, if my math is right. And so let's start with verse 16 of Exodus 22. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god except the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. Now drop down to verse 28. You shall not revile God nor curse the ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs. You shall not circulate a false report. Do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil. Nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. You shall not show partiality to a poor man in his dispute. If you meet your enemy's ox and his donkey going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, and you would refrain from helping it, you shall surely help him with it. You shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. Keep yourself far from a false matter. Do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not justify the wicked. You shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the discerning and perverts the words of the righteous. Also you shall not oppress the stranger, for you know the heart of a stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And so the first three, and really let me restate that. Three out of the first four verses that we read deal with sexual interactions. And so we know that there is a single command, you shall not commit adultery. And if that were all that was said, well, then we would be somewhat left with going back and trying to figure out, well, what did they mean by adultery? What did it include? What all comes under that? But the Lord, in His infinite wisdom, has given us several components that fit up under that. And so here it only touches on a particular circumstance where it says if a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. And so this is I'm getting feedback. This is dealing with a situation where a man seduces a young lady, and she is a virgin, and they are not married. And so there is a consequence for that. It may seem a little bit unusual, and we'll come back to that in just a few minutes. But there are other passages in Leviticus and Deuteronomy that give additional structure to the issue of inappropriate sexual relationships. And I'm not going to go into them in detail, but I'm going to try to give you a bit of a summary of what they say, just so you'll know it. You can go and study it in your own study if you desire to. So Leviticus chapter 18, verses 6 through 23, verses 6 through 23, provides a list of disallowed sexual interactions. And if you read through that, this is capped in verses 24 and 25 with this warning: do not defile yourselves with any of these things. For by all these the nations are defiled, which I am casting out before you. For the land is defiled, therefore I will visit the punishment of its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out its inhabitants. So God does not ignore the sexual looseness and improprieties of nations and peoples. And there will be consequences to those type of behaviors, both in the individual life, but also to a people. And I think we would have to say, well, if God judged Israel for that, then He's going to have to apologize to Israel if He doesn't judge America for that. And we're not the only ones. Many nations of the world are guilty. But if you go and look at the detail in Leviticus 18, it includes various forms of incest. So all kinds of family relationships are laid out there and says you should not uncover the nakedness of this person or that person or this person or that person. And many of them are relatives. So it's forbidding that. But then it also deals with homosexuality. And that's very clearly forbidden in verse 22 of that chapter. It deals with adultery in general, and it deals with sexual activity with animals, which is also touched on here in this chapter in Exodus. Then if you go over to Leviticus 20, well, it repeats an awful lot of those do-nots, but it adds penalties. And very frequently the penalty is death. So there are 3, I think, if my memory is right, penalties associated with these type of inappropriate sexual activities. One is death. The people were to be put to death. At least the guilty parties were to be put to death. But it also includes excommunication. They were to be put out from among the people. So they were basically not to be part of the nation and of the community there. And then the last one seems to be the judgment of God. There were a couple of relationships where it simply it says they will not be able to bear children. So there was that judgment as well that could take place as a result of some of these inappropriate sexual relations. So that's 2 chapters in Leviticus. Then in Deuteronomy 22, very similar to Leviticus 20, in that the punishments are included, but there are several other clarifications that are provided regarding, I'm going to talk about them in general, a man taking advantage of someone he's married. So they get married. And he says, for whatever reason he's dissatisfied, he says, she wasn't a virgin. So it provides some provision to protect the woman from that type of a claim. And then there is also the remedy or the provision for forcing sexual engagement upon a woman. And so, again, those are kind of beyond the scope of the Exodus passage, so I'm going to leave that to you to go into in detail. But we're just going to touch again on what we find here in verses 16, 17, and then 19. And so it kind of goes against, I would say, our cultural perspective, doesn't it? It talks about, well, if a man were to seduce a young lady, then he needs to pay the bride price and take her as his wife. Now, I know growing up, that certainly was considered the appropriate thing to do. If there was premarital sex, they should get married. In our day and age, people would look at that and say, well, you shouldn't force anybody to get married. But what I wanted to think about a little bit was this bride price. The man, the pursuer, was to pay the bride price to the father of the young lady. Now, I think that is a really good idea. You know, I married all 4 daughters, and I'm still waiting for my bride price on those 4 daughters. So I think we should instigate that within our own society. We certainly don't seem to have that. But that is practiced in many cultures throughout the world. The concept of a dowry, the definition of a dowry is a little bit different than this. But basically paying. And so we see examples in Scripture, don't we? If you... let's see where my notes were. Yeah, if you go back to Genesis 24, where Abraham sent a servant out for Isaac, what did he take with him? He took gifts, and he bestowed gifts upon the bride-to-be and upon her family. And we see that a couple of other times. And then we see it even when Dinah was seduced, some say raped, but seduced at least by Shechem, okay, by a non-Jew, an uncircumcised man. And he and his family came to her family and pled. It said he loved her, and he pled that they would give her to him as his bride, and he brought gifts. He brought the bride price to the family, and it didn't work out too well for him. But we see that concept in culture, and so just a couple of thoughts about that. Why would that be incorporated here in the law? One, I think it would be, there are two deterrents here. One is to prevent casual sex. The first one was, you're going to marry this person, like it or not. Okay? That should be somewhat of a deterrent to just going around and sleeping around, because the promise of the law was, no, you've got to marry this person and provide for this person. Not only that, you've got to come up with this bride price. And so I think it would be a deterrent. But then it also says, if her father refuses to allow this scoundrel to marry his daughter, which I can fully grasp that reaction. I would probably shoot the guy, okay, after I got the money. But so there was very much a deterrent in this setup within the nation, that if you do this, first, you're going to bring money. Whatever the father thinks the daughter is worth, you're going to bring it, and you're going to marry her. And if he won't let you marry it, well, you're still going to be out the money. So that's my interpretation as to why this might be incorporated as part of the law. And so then we have what seems to be a disconnected thought in verse 19. It says, whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. So once again, we see that God is very serious about punishing sin. And God specified capital punishment for certain sins. And so this perversion, I'll call it, of engaging in sexual activity with animals, clearly it was something that the nations around them had done, and yet he's making it very clear that this was prohibited and would be punished by death. Now, in the New Testament, we find a few broad instructions, and I want to look at just a couple of them. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses... helps if I get the right book. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 18 through 20. It says there, to the believer, flee sexual immorality. And so if you want to have a pretty good laundry list, go back to those passages in Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and you'll have a pretty good laundry list of what sexual immorality is. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. I don't know that I can fully unpack that, but take it as an extremely serious warning. This will bring devastation into your life. And so we're going to talk about that in just a minute. So, sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have of God, and you are not your own. For you are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and your spirit, which are God's. There's another passage that talks about he who is joined to a harlot becomes one with the harlot. So God has declared that sexual activity actually joins two people together. It's not a casual pastime. It's not a fun thing. It is fun, but it's not to be seen as a game or just a pleasurable activity, because you are joined in God's sight to that person. And I can assure you, it will damage your soul. Now, I'm not talking about the eternal soul that is saved, but your soul that includes your emotions, your mind, your will be damaged if you violate these things. Hebrews 13:4. And here we find that marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled. So sexual relationship within marriage is honorable. Outside of marriage, it is not. But fornicators and adulterers, God will judge. So you may think that you're getting by with something. God's word says no. And there will be a price to pay. And Jerry, I think it's Jerry or somebody, Jeff or Jerry, has made the comment. Sin will, help me out, Jerry, it will take you further than you want to go. It will cost you more than you want to pay, and it will keep you longer than you intended to stay. And that's very true with this area as well as all sin. And then 1 Peter 2, verse 11. Beloved, I beg you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the soul. There's that concept again. It wars against your soul. So why such prohibitions? Well, Satan would tell you, just like he told Adam and Eve, he just doesn't want you to enjoy things. God just doesn't want you to enjoy things. But the reality is, he knows the damage that will be inflicted. And he has set these guidelines up, these restrictions up, to protect us, not to prohibit us in the sense that he doesn't want us to enjoy what we ought to be enjoying, but he set these in place to protect us. Well, tucked in those 4 verses is, let me get back there. Is verse 18. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. And so there's I think, in my mind, that's a good example of this kind of being a disconnected, single shot approach. How does that relate to these other things? And it's tucked right in the middle. Now it could, maybe it does, because in a lot of the false religions there was sexual immorality. So perhaps that's why it's in there. But this word, sorcery, it's a Hebrew word, and it's a complicated word. It comes from like 3 different roots, but it basically means literally to whisper a spell. And so we're talking about someone who is engaging with wicked spirits, with demons, engaging them to try to perform supernatural acts and to try to get information that is not publicly available to other people. And so people come to them, just like Saul did. You remember he went to the witch of Endor, and he wanted to know what was getting ready to happen. And so we see examples that at least illustrate, paint a bit of a picture for us of what these people were doing. First of all, in Exodus 7, first mention of the word is with regard to the magicians and sorcerers of Pharaoh. So in the court of many heathen kings, they had people that, and I'm going to say this word and I'm going to define it, that claimed to have power because of spirits. Now, it wasn't an empty claim. Evil spirits, wicked spirits, demons do exist, and they are powerful. And if you give yourself over to them, they will accomplish things in and through you. So, young people, don't even dabble in it. I'm going to tell you a brief story. When I was a kid, foolish stuff. You might have been there. Yeah, you were there. My cousin. So, we had a Ouija board. My parents didn't think anything about it. And I remember us in the den while the parents were in there chit-chatting and we're in there, hoping that Ouija thing was going to move on the board and point to something. Foolishness. Absolute foolishness to dabble in the spirit realm. But that's what these people did. And so in Exodus, what did they do? They duplicated miracles up to a point. Now, they could only do what God was allowing them to do, and He was doing it to continue to reveal light and harden Pharaoh's heart. So He had a purpose in it. Daniel 2, they were expected to interpret dreams. Remember how Nebuchadnezzar called all the wise men. You need to tell me what the dream was and then tell me the interpretation of the dream. And then in 2 Chronicles 33:6, we read of King Manasseh. And he was probably the most wicked king of the southern tribes. And this is what it says about him. He's said to have sacrificed his children through the fire to a false god, to have practiced witchcraft, and dealt with a familiar spirit. So he was trying to call on a power greater than him when he had the highest power available to him if he would call on him. And so that's the wickedness of this. God is ready and available to make Himself present in our lives if we will yield ourselves to Him. But some people go after these demonic spirits and they practice these things. And so is there any surprise that they were to be put to death? It was the death penalty for introducing this and practicing this within the land of the nation of Israel. And so if you go forward to the New Testament, we see all kinds of examples when Christ was here of casting out demons, those type of things. But over in Revelation is the one that came to my mind. And what is going to be the practice of the beast and the false prophet, the Antichrist and the false prophet? They are going to be performing miracles, simulating power of God, but it's coming from the demons, from Satan and his forces. And so in Revelation 22:15, I won't turn to it, but it tells us the end result. And that is, they will be excluded from the presence of God. They will be cast down for eternal judgment forever that practice those things. Now, the next little category is in verse 20. He who sacrifices to any god except the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. And so basically, pretty straightforward, pretty simple, probably connected maybe with the sorcery, but anybody who brought idolatry into Israel was to be put to death. That wasn't tolerated. It wasn't something to say, oh, well, if they want to do that, that's fine. They were to be put to death. Then we go down to verse 28. And it says, you shall not revile God, nor curse the ruler of your people. Now we're confronted with a bit of a dilemma here that we saw up in Exodus 21:8. If you remember that, we were talking there about a woman who had been sold, so she was a slave. She doesn't please her master. No, I've got the wrong passage. Hang on a second. Let me find out. Maybe it's 22:8. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's 22:8, not 21:8. So this was talking about a thief that had stolen something that had been given into somebody else's safekeeping. And so that's somebody else. So let's say that Clark had given something to Todd that was very valuable. Said, Todd, I'm going to be out of town. I really need you to take care of this for me. And in the midst, it disappears. And Todd is convinced that somebody broke into his house and stole it. Clark's not so sure. And so they were to bring it, it says there, before the judges. And the judges would make a decision. But the word for judge is Elohim. It's Elohim. And some translations, so this is where the translations are split. Some translations talk about bringing it before God, and He would make the discernment. Okay, that's certainly a possibility. Other translations say bring it before the judges, and they will make the decision. We have that same dilemma over here or down here in verse 28. You shall not revile God, capital, Elohim, nor curse the ruler of your people. Now, in my mind, I see a similar translation dilemma there. It could be, you shall not revile the judges, nor curse the ruler of your people. That would certainly have some consistency within the verse. Some of you may be familiar with a Hebrew help. It's by two gentlemen, Kyle and Delich, and I probably butcher their names. They are absolutely convinced that this has to be translated as God, and they use the same logic that I tend to use as to why it could be translated judges, because it's followed by this statement about rulers. And they don't give any further explanation than that. Then there is another group called Jameson, Fawcett, and Brown, which give leeway to either translation. So that means you can make up your own mind what it's talking about. But the thing that's clear, it is telling us we are to respect authority. So whether it's God or judges or rulers, we are to respect authority. And so that's clearly laid out here in these commandments, and also over in Romans chapter 13 for us. And it's something that at times can be very difficult to want to do. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God. And those who resist will bring judgments on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he, the one in authority, is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. He is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath upon him who practices evil. Therefore you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. So we are told to be subject to those that are in authority. Now, with the political environment that we live in, over the past number of years, I'm not isolating it, so over the past number of years, I guarantee you that you have had some difficulty in respecting those who are in authority. You're very unusual if you haven't. But we are called to respect, not because of who they are, not because of what they say, not because of how they live, but because the role that they have. It is a role that is ordained by God, and we are to respect that. Now, we get to a little bit more pleasant passage, and that is down in verses 29 through 31. So it says there, you shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices, the firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me, and it shall be holy. No, forget verse 31. I'm going to get to that later. That's disconnected. Okay, so the concept, bringing the first of your produce. And I use that word very broadly. I'm not talking about produce like in the produce section of the store. The first of your increase, whether it's animal, whether it's plant, whatever it is, even your firstborn son. Now, other instructions said you could redeem him back. Okay, but you had to pay to the Lord to redeem him back. He was God's because God had wiped out the firstborn of Egypt and had spared the firstborn of Israel. And so, again, there are a lot of different aspects to this concept of first fruits. And in chapter 23, we're going to get into some of the Feast of Israel. So I'm not going there tonight. I'm not going to get into the Feast of First Fruits. I'm simply talking about the concept that's laid out for us here. Now, in Numbers chapter 18, verses 12 through 33, 12 and 13, we find that the first fruits that are mentioned here, as they were brought, in other words, you set them aside and you brought them to the Lord, and they were then given to the priest and the Levites. And he said, basically, God said, Levites, you're not going to have a portion of land. You have no land of your own. They did have some cities, but they didn't have an allotment. So he was going to take care of them because they were ministering to him. And it says over there in that passage that this was going to be the best of the land. So these first fruits were the best that they could bring. And he is asking them to do that. Further instruction is given over in Deuteronomy 26, verses 2 through 10. And if you read those passages on your own, a couple things are clear. Obedience to this was, first of all, an act of thanksgiving. As the harvest was coming in, and it apparently started with the barley harvest, and then the wheat harvest was later, and the grapes were on the vine, and the olives were on the tree, and as they would begin to gather the first fruits, they were to take them to the Lord. They were to give them to the Lord. Now, that could be tough. You don't know what the crop's going to produce. You don't know what kind of year it's going to be. But you are bringing of the first that you receive and giving it to the Lord. And so it's an act of thanksgiving and it's an act of faith in His provision. And so think about it this way. What did God promise He would do if the nation was obedient? Huh? Bless them. Abundance. Okay? So if that were the case, it might be easier to bring those first fruits, right? But what did He say was going to happen if the nation was disobedient? There was not going to be an abundance. There was going to be drought and famine, etc., etc. But He didn't say, hey, in times like that, forget the first fruits. He didn't say that. And so for those who desired to be faithful, it could get hard. It was a test of their faithfulness to God, a test of their willingness to honor God. And so as we see it outlined here, that's really the concept that I think is being highlighted. Are you willing to take the first before you have the rest and the best and give it to the Lord? Now, was that just for them? Well, let's roll forward. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10. A more general statement, still directed, I think, to the nation of Israel primarily, but we certainly draw on a lot of the Proverbs. And it says this, honor the Lord with your possessions and the first fruits of your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. So there is a response by God when we do this. When we choose to honor Him with what He has blessed us with, He promises that He will provide for us. And so this is not the prosperity gospel. Okay, we're going to see in a couple of other passages. It's simply saying if you love Him enough to give to Him in recognition that He's the only reason you have it, then He's going to take care of you. And He's going to bless you. And He is going to provide for you. Look over in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 6 through 8. This is the principle that we find. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. But he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Now that's a spiritual law. Okay? So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, having all sufficiency in all things, may have an abundance to use it as you want to. That's not what it says. May have an abundance for every good work. So He blesses us so that we can use it for His purposes again. It's a circular thing. We give to Him, honoring Him, recognizing that He's why we have this. He gives back to us in abundance, so we can give back to Him in more abundance. And we continue that way through life. I'm running out of time. We'll finish up pretty quick here. So, very quickly, we're going to skip verse 31. I'm going to let you study that for yourself. Go over to chapter 23, verses 1 through 6. Well, 1 through 3 and 6. You shall not circulate a false report, but do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness. You shall not follow a crowd to do evil. Nor shall you testify in a dispute so as to turn aside after many to pervert justice. You shall not show partiality to the poor man in his dispute. And then down to verse 6, you shall not pervert the judgment of your poor in his dispute. So one of the commandments had to do with not bearing false witness against your neighbor. And here he seems to be highlighting why we might be tempted to do that at times. Part of the things here is peer pressure. He says, don't go with a big crowd. So one of the requirements in Israel was that for anything to be brought to a conclusion, there had to be two witnesses. And it's over in Deuteronomy 19:15 that says there have to be 2 or 3 witnesses to establish a matter. So if you look at that in that context, then when it talks about you shall not circulate a false report, do not put your hand with the wicked to be an unrighteous witness, it's talking about 2 people coming together with the wrong motive. Not to declare the truth of what happened, but to controvert it to their own gain or to somebody else's detriment. They might have a grudge against somebody. They might want to get somebody in trouble. So he's saying, don't do that. Don't let other people influence your testimony. We certainly see that type thing happening when Jezebel decided she wanted Naboth's vineyard for her husband. And so they're not to succumb to peer pressure. We see that you shall not follow a crowd to do evil. In verse 3, it even says, don't let your emotions drive your testimony. So it's talking about don't show partiality to the poor man in his dispute. Now we would think it would be the opposite at times, and there are passages that deal with the opposite side of that. Don't pervert justice for the poor, but this is saying don't come up with a witness and a testimony just because you feel sorry for this person because they're poor. Tell the truth. Be an honest witness. And so that is kind of that section. I'm abbreviating it. And then you got a few others. They weren't to eat meat that was an animal that died naturally or was torn by another beast. Why? Why? Well, the only good reason I could find is the likelihood that the blood had not properly been drained out of that animal, and they were not to eat the blood. So that certainly makes sense, I guess, unless you're sitting there watching that bobcat tear up that other animal and you get it immediately and make sure all the blood's drained out. But he didn't leave that leeway. He just said you're not to do that. So if you guys are going deer hunting, you better shoot them yourself. Yeah, and that pretty much covers. There are a couple of other things there, but we're out of time. So I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Bert.